can also chat with at the end about what does this really mean in your life at school, and how does it really work in practice. It's going to be a fantastic afternoon. I'm just going to wait for a couple more people to join us so that we start promptly at 3:30. And, you know, just to let you know as well, from Thinking Schools South Africa, here to support you as much as we possibly can to implement doing school differently and more effectively based on the growth and using an array of explicit thinking strategies. And we've also had a very tough time over this, the lockdown period. And so we generally, any excess funds that we make go into supporting schools that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. And we really look at ways to be able to continue this work. So one way is we have a special on that if you want whole staff training, it's only 10,000 Rand for online training, and that will go towards that kind of work. And we've also started a crowdfunding initiative for anyone who has any access to any funding or funders. So we're really upbeat, we're really excited, we invented ourselves on an online space, and it's all work in progress. So we're still learning and would love your input, and we're here for you. So very excited about this afternoon. And we have a few minutes to go. And I'm just seeing some wonderful faces there, and hello to Pro-Ed House. And
oh, Anita, I see you there.
To the Grove, and wonderful that the Kingsmead team are there and waiting, and there are some primary school drive team members who are ready and waiting. Hi, Joe Duesenberg, nice to see you. And Helene from Grove, and it's just exciting, really lovely.
Hey, Jane, how about we ask people to write down in the chat box where they're coming in from? I'd love to see the different schools and locations
please.
where people are at. So
Thank
in the
you,
chat
James,
box down the bottom, folks.
Thanks for reminding me, James. Yes, please, I'd like to have that chat going all the time. This is a conversation. And we believe so much in collaboration, and we spark ideas off each other. So keep it going, say hi and say where you're from, and oh, yay, wow.
Oh, yay.
And the Grove and Buren High, and
I know some of these schools.
Yes, Cornwall, Rodine, Kenridge. So we're seeing quite a few, some of Durban Girls College, Stanford Lake.
Durban Girls.
Awesome. So we have great representation from Johannesburg, Cape Town, from Fatima. Just
Brenda, thanks for saying hello.
Yay. And Ramona from Pietermaritzburg, where I come from. Nice to see you. Awesome.
Summer Hill.
Wallace from Maritzburg.
Sorry, I was a bit late.
Nothing's late. We're starting at 3:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hello, Carol Ann. Lovely to see your name there.
My screen is full of lovely ladies. Are there any gentlemen on the line with us, or is it all lovely ladies here today?
Oh dear, James. Well,
I see Ingrid and Amy and Anita and Chantel and Elaine and Helene and Belinda and Yvonne and Sky and all ladies.
Well, James, that's another discussion today about women who rule the world, and do they do it better or worse than men, and do they show up or not?
I have seen some research that said that countries led by women have done much better in the current crisis.
Yeah, I read that too. So interesting stuff.
So I'm, of course, coming to you from the COVID capital of Australia at the moment, from Melbourne.
Yeah, so you have very strict lockdown, and we...
Yeah, we have for a while. So, yeah. I'll tell you what, now that we know where people are from, I'd be very interested to know why they're here. What's their burning question? What is it that if we don't do for you by the end of the session, that you'll be disappointed? So I'd be really keen to see some of those questions come through, because I'm quite prepared to throw out what I've got in mind if people say they want to hear something different. So if you've got a particular question, pondering, an unanswered thought in your mind around growth mindset, let's stick to growth mindset broadly. I'd love to know what it is and what's brought you here today. So pop that in. Oh, so Peter Anderson just said, it's wonderful to see you. She must have been talking to you, Jane.
No, she's talking to everyone. Maybe she could tell us who it is. Yes, something that I'm hearing a lot about, James, at the moment is assessment. And when we change the way we do things, obviously, you know, you get the behavior that you reward. And so assessment is something I'm seeing a lot of growing interest in. So that's the point of view.
I can give you the 1-minute answer for growth mindset and assessment. That's the meme I carry with me when I think about assessment and growth mindset is that assessment needs to be about where you are, not who you are.
Yeah.
And if you carry that with you and remember that when you give those grades, it's about where a student is up to, not who they are, not how smart they are or anything else. It's just where they're up to.
Yes.
And if we carry that with us, it'll really help reinforce the idea that, you know, our students are on a journey, and you know, we've got no idea of telling where they're going to end up. We just simply cannot tell. And so when we remind ourselves, and in our assessment, in our reward system, in our language and so forth, that grade, that award, that standard is just where they're up to, not who they are. That's the bit I remember there.
Yeah,
so
it's not putting someone in a box. Absolutely.
Yeah. I've got to speak South African tonight, don't I? I've got to say yeah instead of yeah.
Yeah, is it?
I still haven't seen any questions come up for, as I do this, folks, I'm looking at the camera here, but I'm looking at your chat if I look this way. I haven't seen, someone said how to apply growth mindset in the classroom. Okay, that was Carolina.
Oh dear, there's a Kiwi here. Sorry, James.
Oh, okay. Belinda, are you a Kiwi? Belinda, is that you? Belinda Blackwell, I can see you right there. Are you coming to us from South Africa? Or are you coming from New Zealand?
Based in Cape Town. That's quite a good reason. So I appreciate
Did you get stuck there?
Yeah, I did rather. But I'm a bit like the part of the furniture here now.
Yeah, Cape Town's a nice place to get stuck though.
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
James, Belinda is the principal at Anita's school.
Ah, okay, yes, lovely.
Yes,
I still have fond memories of visiting there.
Yes, well, I think we met at Hertz here when you came over a year ago, a few years ago.
Oh, the trip I remember was quite a number of years ago. My first trip, I remember going through. I spent a morning there and visited the classrooms, and it was beautiful.
2010.
We were doing the sorry.
2010.
2010. Well, oh God.
Gosh, that wasn't last year.
No, it must have been more recent than that, Jane, because
it was more recently.
2015, and it was at Hertz.
Ingrid, that was when there was the road show
back
at Kingsmead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, I think we're going to declare this open. It is now 15:29, and I think we must do it. So
cool.
Over to you, James. Thank you so much for so generously supporting TSSA right from the very, very beginning, when you actually sat at this very table that I'm sitting at and trained Ingrid and a few other people in habits of mind. And that was before we started, as we started, before we started training. And yeah, that's been incredible. So we're really very, very grateful for your ongoing support. We all, I think, in this group have heard of the growth mindset. We know a little bit, but the challenge always is, how do we really, really do it? And that's why we're so excited to have you here today. So you're going to give us some great background on that, and then over to the Kingsmead team to show us how and what they. So should we go for it?
Let's go for it. We're starting right on time, which I think is always a good thing to do. And the quicker I get started, the quicker I will get finished and let the stars of the show, which the team from Kingsmead really let loose with what they've been doing. Because I'm going to talk about some theory, but Ingrid and the team there at Kingsmead are going to talk about the practice. So I'm excited to listen to what they've got to say. So I won't spend too long talking to you about this. For those of you who don't know me, my name's James. Look, I wanted to get a couple of things across today that I think, look, let's face it, the numbers are in, this stuff doesn't work. You've come along to a growth mindset workshop to find out how to implement growth mindsets in schools and classrooms. And the research over the last few years has been showing that it just doesn't work. What's happened is that people have picked up Carol Dweck's book. Here's a copy of it here. And I heard this book described recently as the most unread book on people's bookshelves. And I think it's accurate, because what people have done is they've picked it up because they have to. They've heard about it at a conference. You've got to read it. They've read the back and they've gone, oh, that's interesting. They read the first chapter and gone, oh, yeah, I think I understand this. They read the second chapter and went, that's a bit like the first chapter. I'll put it down now and I'll go to Pinterest. And what we've done is we've launched into Pinterest and social media and grabbed all this growth mindset material and tried to implement it in our schools. And as I said, the research now is showing that what we've been doing to date hasn't worked. Carol Dweck said recently that this work around growth mindsets is far more complex, I'll paint that big screen, than we ever imagined. In the beginning, we didn't recognize the complexity of implementation. That when it came down to it, what we were trying to do in the classrooms, taking a simple idea, I mean, it is a simple idea, Carol Dweck's work, and trying to implement it in classrooms turned out to be much more difficult than we thought. So what I want to talk to you today is why it's so difficult to implement growth mindsets. Oh, I'm hearing a couple of people in the background. Perhaps just make sure you got your microphones on mute, because otherwise everyone's going to hear the private conversation you're having, which can be quite embarrassing at times. So let's have a chat. Oops, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do that. I'm going to stop that. There we go. What Carol Dweck described was this fairly simple idea. Someone with a fixed mindset sees the world like this. Hey, look at me. What you see is pretty much what you get. The person standing here today is pretty much the person that's going to be standing here in 5 years' time, because that's just who I am. And when you see yourself like that, you assume your basic characteristics are pretty stable through your life. You spend your life looking inwards. You ask yourself, who am I? What abilities do I have? And as a result of discovering the answer to that question, you ask yourself, where do I fit in the world? Can I do what you do? Well, I'm not like you, so I couldn't do that. Maybe I'm a bit like somebody else and I can do what they're doing. And you love a personality test. Just a quick show of hands as I glance at the screen. Who's ever been the victim of a personality test? Someone's given them a personality test and said, oh, you're one of these. You're a green LBTSRQ or whatever it is. So therefore you can do these things. But too bad if you want to do these things, you're not cut out for those. This is a very fixed mindset view of the world. On the other hand, someone with a growth mindset sees the world like this. Hey, look at me. What you see is just who I happen to be today. I change. Not just a little bit, I change a lot. I change some of my most basic characteristics, my talents, my abilities, even my intelligence. It's all up for grabs. The person standing here today, a shadow of the person who is going to be standing here in 5 years' time, because I get on with the business of changing myself. And when you see the world like that, you don't spend your life looking inwards, asking, who am I? What can I do? You spend your life looking outwards, asking, who do I want to become? And in that difference, look inside yourself, ask, who am I? What abilities do I have? Compared to the growth mindset, look outwards, say, who do I want to become and what do I need to do to become that person? Is the key difference between the fixed and the growth mindset. And that's the idea of choice. It's not that people with a fixed mindset make bad choices. They just don't see a choice in the first place. I just couldn't do what you do because I've never been good at maths. I just can't do maths. So those people that do maths, they're different to me. I can't do what they do. And we don't choose the maths because we don't see the choice in the first place. Now, in a nutshell, that's it. I could pass over to Ingrid right now and say, I've just explained what mindsets are. Tell me how you do it in a classroom. Because a mindset is that idea in your head. But when you hold that idea in your head, there's a whole bunch of symptoms that happen. Now, I use the word symptom very deliberately because the mindset is just the idea. These behaviors are the actions you see as a result of this idea. They're not the mindset, they're the result of believing these things. So let me just share this with you. Someone with a fixed mindset will avoid a challenge. And why wouldn't you? For someone with a fixed mindset, things that are hard today are going to be hard tomorrow. So you don't want to take those on. Challenges are just an opportunity to fail from their perspective. You give up easily because that thing that says it's hard now will tell you it's hard later. And the next thing's going to be even harder and even harder and even harder. These people see effort as a bad thing, a bad thing. Just again, as I glance across to the gallery view over here, how many of you have jumped on the praise effort bandwagon? Who's praising effort? Praise effort all the time? Praise kids for effort? Yeah. Why would you praise kids for something they think is bad? Just think about that for a moment. When you say great effort, good to see you working so hard to someone with a fixed mindset, they hear you must be stupid or you wouldn't have to work so hard. Oops. At another time, we can unpack the effort work and talk about how we go about praising effort effectively. But I'll say this now, this is not an effort mindset. It's a growth mindset. And if the sort of effort you're putting in isn't leading to growth, it's the wrong sort of effort. But what we often see is we see students putting in this sort of effort. I call that the constipation version of effort. Have you seen students in doing that? And we come up to them and say, well, good work. Keep up that. Good to see you trying so hard. Good effort from you today. It's a shame you're not learning anything. But as long as you're trying your hardest, that's okay. Can I just suggest to you that's possibly one of the most damaging things we can say to a child? As long as you're trying your hardest, that's okay. What's the message there? They've just put everything they've got into that piece of work. It's not very good, but seeing so you put everything into it, I suppose we can't expect anything better. It's not an effort mindset, it's a growth mindset. Let's keep going through these symptoms. These kids will ignore your feedback, not because they're uncooperative, they just don't see it as helpful. For them, all that formative feedback you're giving them is just a sign, just as pointing out their weaknesses, pointing out their deficits, so they don't want to read it. And they're threatened by the success of other people. everything you can do just highlights something I can't. So I'll cut you down, I'll make excuses and do all that sort of stuff. For these students, it's the being that comes before the doing. These students have to look inside themselves and ask, have I got the abilities before they'll try and do the work? And you'll hear this question. How often have you had a student come up to you and say, Miss, do you think I'll be good at this? Who said that question? See, when students ask you that question, they're asking you to look inside them, tell them they've already got the abilities, and as a result, remove any risk of failure. And these students think that learning is about discovering their abilities. They come to classroom wondering if they're going to be able to do what you're asking them to do. And sometimes we reinforce that. Sometimes we'll come into a classroom and we'll start teaching, we'll teach. And we'll say to the class, by the way, how many of you already know how to do this? Now we mean how many of you have already learnt how to do this, but we say, how many of you already know how to do this? And for someone with a fixed mindset, they're looking around the room going, geez, some of these kids can already do this. They can just like do it naturally. I don't know how to do that. They're different to me. Now, obviously someone with a growth mindset, very, very different set of symptoms. Someone with a growth mindset loves a challenge. Don't give me hard stuff. Don't give me easy stuff. Give me hard stuff, thing that's going to stretch me and challenge me. They're more persistent because they understand that things that are hard today are easy tomorrow. And the things, it's not hard, harder. It's hard, easy, hard, easy. It's only the growth, the next step that's hard. These kids see effort as a good thing. Praise these students for effort all day, every day. In fact, if you try to praise them for the standard they've just reached, they're likely to turn around and say, I know, but did you see what I had to do to get there? Because they understand that their best is only their best when you measure by yesterday's standards. They know assessment is just about where they are. They expect to get better. By tomorrow's standards, it's going to be their second best. So they're not particularly interested in this standard they just reached. What they're interested in is what they did to get there and being reassured that doing the same sorts of things will help them reach a higher and higher standard. These students love your feedback and they love the success of other people. Everything other people do just proves to them that that's something that's possible. These students understand that becoming comes before being, that they don't come into your class and say, have I got musical abilities? Will I be able to play music? They say, I haven't got any musical abilities, but I think music's really cool. Can I have some lessons so I can get those abilities, please? They're not looking inside themselves to find abilities and talents. They're looking to control those abilities and talents through their own efforts and behaviours. And they understand that learning is about creating their abilities. I love this next quote from George Bernard Shaw that says, life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. And I think what George Bernard Shaw has captured there is the key idea behind the fixed and the growth mindset. That someone with a growth mindset understands that life is about creating themselves, not about discovering themselves. But we hear it all the time. People saying, I wish I knew who I was. I'm trying to work out what I'm good at. Someone with a growth mindset understands that they're creating their abilities. Now, clearly very different behaviours between someone who's got a fixed mindset and someone who's got a growth mindset. Just by a show of hands, as I look over to my gallery view over here. How many of you would prefer your students to have a growth mindset? Just a quick show of hands. All right, great. Carol doesn't know for sure, but that's okay. Oh, no, she put her hand up. That's good. See, isn't it great? You're never quite sure if I'm looking at you or not. Obviously, we want students to have a growth mindset. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as going into our classroom, taking the advice of Pinterest, putting up a poster that says, this is fixed, this is growth, can you do this, please? It just doesn't work like that. But 90% of the strategies that we're adopting in schools at the moment take that approach. Don't say you can't, say you can't yet, and you'll be all right. The problem with that is that sometimes not yet becomes still not yet, when a month, a week, a year later, the student still can't do it. And what happens is that you made a promise to that student that they would be able to do it, but a year later they still can't, and they've lost trust in you now. So it's more complicated than putting up the poster, changing the words, changing what you're saying. Now, I'm very conscious of the time, and Ingrid, I'm going to start eating into your time very, very shortly if I'm not careful. What we've discovered is that social media has said, this is the fixed mindset, it's really bad. This is the growth mindset, it's really good. And so we asked teachers, which one have they got? How many of you, just a quick show of hands, how many of you got a fixed mindset? Oh, I'm not seeing a lot of hands go up there, am I? So what we've done is we've actually stigmatized the fixed mindset. This is one of my favorite posters from social media. Oops, I pressed it twice. There we go. Yeah, this is the way we're portraying the fixed mindset. Not only is the fixed mindset bad, apparently it's evil as well, with Darth Vader behind there. And what's happened is we've created this stigma around the fixed mindset. We've said we got one really bad one, one really good one. Everyone said, I've got the good one. And once you've said you got that, no further work is necessary. And what we've created is what Carol Dweck and her colleague Susan Mackey describe as a false mindset. And a false mindset is someone who intellectually understands fixed and growth. They might be a growth mindset advocate in your school. They might adopt growth mindset strategies in their classroom. But because they haven't deeply examined their own mindset, what's actually coming out of their mouth in their classroom is that they're sending much more fixed messages. For example, I worry about the number of schools that have adopted growth mindset and the catchphrases around praise effort. And in how many of those schools does praise effort become praise struggling students for effort? And when you do that, when your own mindset leads you to say, oh, good to see that student working hard, oh, you've got it all under control again, well done, you're actually increasing the belief in both those students that effort makes up for a deficit. For example, how many of you can imagine this scenario in your classroom? You give this student a lot of formative feedback. It's great to see you working hard. Keep it up. Try this out. This is a new strategy for you. You'll get there eventually. Keep up the hard work. You look at this student and you say, great work. Well done. You've got that all under control. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. That when you do that, you praise one student for working hard when they can't get it, and praise another student for not having to work hard when they get it, you're increasing the belief that some people just have it and others don't. Why wouldn't you say to this student, sorry about that, that work was too easy for you, wasn't it? What I needed you to do today was to be working just as hard as this student was. When we're learning, it's all about struggling. Now, this student may or may not be up to where you're up to at the moment, but it's all about the struggle that leads to growth. I had a wonderful quote the other day from a colleague of mine who said that, and I'm looking at it, growth and comfort cannot coexist. That what we're trying to do in this world is to normalize the struggle. So what we've got here is a situation where teachers around the world have adopted a growth mindset, but you don't actually get to choose. Your mindset is part of what we call your unconscious bias. It's what guides your actions and decisions when you're not paying attention. And you are sending in your classroom so many messages all day, every day, that influence students' mindsets. And the number one thing you can do to change a student's mindset is not to put a poster on the wall. It's not to say not yet. It's not to put up the, don't say this, say this. The number one thing you can do to help change a student's mindset is to spend some time reflecting on your own. And to help you do that today and to start you on this journey towards strategies that actually make a difference in the classroom, what I want to share with you is this very common diagram that you see a lot of on social media. It's by Nigel Holmes. It's a great diagram. But the next time you see it, I want you to do this to it. I want you to split it down the middle, because in reality, no one has a fixed mindset. There's not a single person in the world with one of these, and there's not a single person in the world with one of those. In reality, we all lie along this continuum. And what we're going to put for you in the chat box right now is a copy of this mindset continuum. And it's something Ingrid's going to talk about in just a minute or two, and how her girls have used it at Kingsmead College. But what it allows you to do, and I'll come back here. What it allows you to do is to recognize that this work around changing mindsets is not about teaching mindsets. We've got to stop this idea that to help students develop a growth mindset, we need to tell them what it is. We don't need to tell them what it is. What we need to do is to develop pedagogy and strategies that move students along that continuum. The reason we've introduced this continuum is because it allows us to recognize that this is a journey. Your success with this work, with growth mindsets, has to recognize, as Carol Dweck told us not long ago, that a growth mindset is not a declaration. You don't get to choose it, and you can't just say, I'm going to have one, thanks very much. This work is about some of our deepest held understandings about what it means to be us. And we don't change that easily. We don't shift students' mindsets by putting up a poster, by adopting some language. It's a much longer journey that I'm sure Ingrid's about to tell us about. And I want to finish my little bit here by pointing out that your success with this work won't be measured by the number of students with a growth mindset. You're not going to be able to go into your classrooms and count the number of students with growth mindsets. Your success with this work is going to be measured by how much more growth orientated those students have become. How far along that mindset continuum have you taken them? And if you expect after 6 months or a year for your students to have growth mindsets, you're going to be disappointed. Because I'm sure, as Ingrid is just about to say, that's not how it works. Our job is not to instill or install or adopt a growth mindset. Our job is to nudge, to nourish, to nurture a more growth-orientated mindset in our students. And that happens by challenging some of our most deepest held beliefs about what it means to be us. Beliefs that have been built up over a long, long period of time. Now, obviously, this is a bigger piece of work. We don't do it in 25 minutes. We do it over a longer period of time, and TTSA will talk to you about how to do that. But Ingrid, I think it's your turn now to have a chat about the wonderful work you've been doing and what this work of moving students through the mindset continuum looks like in a real classroom in South Africa.
Thank you, James. Yeah, that was.
Pleasure.
It's exactly that. It's the complexities, and I've got some slides here that will just preempt what the girls are going to be talking to you about just now. But really, is that slide showing yet? No, not yet. Sorry, let me just get that going here. There we go.
Beautiful. We see it now.
There, yeah, I'm getting there now. Oh, sorry, we had this all these things have popped up in the meantime. There we go. Let's get that over here. Thank you. Yes. So obviously, with the complexities that James was speaking to, I think that's where our deep learning has occurred and reflection over many, many years. This has been a journey that has started. I think we met James in 2010, as we were saying earlier, and with Jane. This is just what it looks like at the moment in our school. This is a snapshot. In some areas, it's far too short to give you the depth of insight into the work we've been doing. But it's just to give you an idea of what it could look like in a school. A lot of what we have, I was thinking about the words that we come into contact with so frequently in our conversations, in our readings, that have to do with growth. These are in themselves concepts. The Agile James talks in his book about Agile learner. Tom Schimmer talks about the Agile teacher. We talk about learning, unlearning, and relearning as being growth mindset. Looking at differentiation, inclusion as mindset, looking at the concept of potential, the whole idea of improvement, of the role of feedback, the zone of proximal development, the Goldilocks zone. I've done a lot of reading recently about disequilibrium. If we are to think about what COVID has just thrown us into, talk about disequilibrium and struggle and discomfort, you know, that in itself has been an enormous area of growth for every person in this room here. So if we look at what this translates to in our space, in our context, the other insights that we've got really are that none of this can happen unless there is a safe space, an emotional safe space, a space in which both teachers and students and more parents, because they're so much part of our learning community, are able to be vulnerable and are supported in having courage and recognized for the courage that it takes. Sort of feeding into the idea of wellness, not just the physical wellness, but very much more and more the social and emotional wellness for any of this to be able to take place. So having said that, there's the dispositions to how it is that we unpack what growth, what all of these, the word clouds and growth and learning speaks to, is that we are so becoming increasingly mindful and well considered, all the things, considering well what it is that we are actually trying to develop in our space. Intentional as to what we are trying to achieve, and together with intentionality comes transparency, that we are so, that we deeply consider what it is that we're doing, but that we share that with other people and allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to have that questioned. It's not comfortable, and none of this is comfortable, and sometimes you just want to say, it's okay, listen, trust us, we got this. But actually being questioned in these concepts is so valuable in taking us forward. We've become more and more deliberate and explicit in what it is that we are doing. The Thinking School South Africa, when we're teaching different tools, we are explicit. That's one of the fundamentals of being a thinking school, is how we are explicit in teaching all of these things. So what we are not just talking about the tools, but the cognitive tools, but also the social emotional cognitive tools too. And our approach is unbelievably rigorous. It is not dogmatic, but it is really rigorous in that our intention or the rigor comes from reflecting, from surveys, from asking, from reflection again, from taking it forward and reflecting again, from that constant seeking to improve in the space. All of this, there's a reciprocal relationship between the philosophy of learning and all of these concepts that I've put out here. They feed each other. It's the philosophy of learning and teaching. It's our pedagogy, and how that feeds our understanding of these concepts of these terms, as well as understanding these concepts of these terms also deepens our understanding of the philosophy of learning and teaching. And then on top of that, this is how we nurture a growth-oriented environment. By unpacking what all of these things are, is how we are able to nurture a growth-oriented environment. We don't get it right all the time, but what we do is to be deliberate about trying to achieve that. The other important aspect here in the context here is that we're not doing this alone. It is crucial that we have conversations about this, that we have debates as we develop our understanding and deepen our understanding with the complexities of what all of this means in our space. And then the last one I have here is, if we can just move my thing, is the community, is that it is about the sense of belonging, that every person who is involved in our space, we value their participation, we seek their participation, we want diversity in the room, we want contrary ideas, and we also value their contribution, that they feel that their contributions are valued. So it's that sense of belonging. And I think within the space that we are finding ourselves at the moment, where things are really hard, James, the economy in South Africa is having a really hard time. Our parents, that is worldwide, but I think particularly in South Africa, we are struggling, and we are struggling with having hope for the future. And if we can talk to this philosophy of learning within a growth-oriented culture, this is how we can bring about hope and opportunities for healing. All of this is ways of showing our youth that they can create and they have choice in the way that this takes forward. And I think for me, developing the complexity that I have, or deepening my complex understanding, is understanding how this applies equally to me as a human being, as a teacher within this space, as to my colleagues who are in this space, and showing them and helping them to move forward with hope and with healing, as well as our students, and for our parents to have that same hope and healing possibilities. Often trying to understand what a concept is, it's very useful to look at what it's not. James alluded—
Hey, Ingrid, can I interrupt just for a sec?
Yeah.
So I can hear the passion in your voice, and it's just beautiful. I think one of the things that really struck me about your last slide was the complete absence of posters, of slogans, of all that stuff that social media is telling us to do. That what you're doing is surrounding the girls with this environment that is all about their control of their own identity, about their growth, about that deliberateness of what they do. And that's much, much closer to the approach that actually sees results, as opposed to you're teaching for a growth mindset instead of teaching about it. And I think that's the point that the people watching today should come away with. It's about creating that environment to allow the growth mindset to come about, rather than trying to teach about it. But I'll throw it back to you.
Yep. Thank you, James. It's exactly that. When I saw in some of the chats and people asking for ideas of what it looks like in a classroom, I cannot give you a definitive answer. What we are talking about in this space is how to create that culture in which we become increasingly growth-oriented. And that leads to this slide here, where to actually understand what is it not then. So, and so much, let me go, let's keep doing that. it is not judgmental or punitive. And that sounds so obvious, but if we look at how traditionally we've done schooling, so much of how we respond to children and even how we give feedback to teachers in their space comes across as being judgmental and possibly even punitive. So it's to try and move away from that. It's also not rigid, nor is it inflexible. It's not about fear. Fear is it takes us totally away from the ability to be growth oriented if we are fearful. Also, it's to move away from shame or embarrassment. It's interesting speaking, you'll hear from our students just now, when how the shame and embarrassment is a major factor for them choosing not to engage in something that they might have had that not been an element. Interesting, this keeping a record of wrongs as an educational institution. I recently had a interaction with parents. In this distance learning program, we give fortnightly feedback to parents, and they get a form that gives them an idea of how well or not their child has engaged and submitted work. And one of the parents was absolutely distraught that her daughter had not submitted 2 pieces of work. The teachers had engaged with the child, and the parents were now told about this. They felt that it was so horrendous that there was now a record of their child not having submitted 2 pieces of work. And the mom's words to me were, but this child she's now in grade 6, she's been here at our school since grade 0. She never has ever had not submitted some work, and now this is a blight on her record. And I was so struck that a tool like we have been giving feedback to parents landed in a way that was perceived as, oh my word, my child's being judged and now there's a blight on her record. So just that understanding of how things land, how they intended and how they land, often there's a misalignment there. And everybody in the room, please understand that having a growth mindset or even being growth oriented is not a silver bullet. It is not the panacea. It is not the answer to everything. What it does is it shows a way forward. It gives us a way forward. It provides the opportunity for hope and for healing. And it is by no ways the easy path. I'm not quite sure if there is an easy path right now. But I do think that by defaulting to the way we were taught and the way we were assessed and the way that discipline was dealt with and the way that we did things when we were children possibly, that may be seen as being easier. Forging ahead in this space where it is growth takes enormous courage. I know, James, if you want to add anything in there.
Look, I think you're doing a great job. The silver bullet part, that it's not a silver bullet, I think is really important. That one of Carol Dweck's famous TED Talks, she talks about the power of yet. And some of you will have picked up that I've sort of said, it's not all about saying not yet. And what she says in that video, if you listen carefully to it, her TED Talk, she says the power of yet is that it gives you a pathway into the future. It doesn't tell you how to go along that pathway. It just shows you the pathway exists. Mm-hmm. And so the growth mindset just says there is a chance of a journey here. You've still got to take the journey though. And so I think you're right. So it's not a silver bullet. It just allows people to understand that they can change, but it's not the change itself.
Yeah. Thank you. I chose... There's so much, we could spend weeks going through different areas. I just chose 3 areas of impact to explore very briefly with you. The first one being pedagogy, assessment and feedback. I mean, that in itself is a massive topic, each concept there. I think for us, what has changed fundamentally is our collaboration and understanding, bless you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. That's when you need the mute button.
Understanding how important it is to know what your learning intentions are, and your learning intentions as to what your habit of mind is that you're going to be teaching, what your concepts are that you're going to be teaching, what your skills and your strategies are so the planning and collaboration with teams has changed for us significantly as our understanding of a growth mindset has developed and being growth oriented has developed. Also, the sharing of those learning intentions. We are far more open in sharing them. We share them with our students, but we also share them with the parents. Our assessment is based upon those learning intentions and also having the children having had multiple opportunities to be able to get feedback on how they're doing in meeting those learning intentions. The role of a brief and of rubrics is something that we are exploring in great depth. I've had many, I've had conversations with James also about rubrics in as far as assessments going, and how it is that we can show children what success criteria might look like and levels of success within a rubric. So the intentionality from a planning point of view has been ramped up enormously. I think it's one of the changes that has also happened since we've been doing our distance learning program is that's become far more rigorous than it ever was before. Understanding how important scaffolding is as part of our pedagogy. Where we were in the classroom directly, it was far more easy to interact with children and help them where they were, and how in a distance learning program, our scaffolding had to be so much more rigorous. And that, I think, has improved our pedagogy in the classroom. The feedback, James, you were talking about that as well, finding the areas of improvement or where there has been a lack of improvement and what it is specifically that child can do to be able to improve in that area. Is there anything you want to add there, James?
No, just keep going with it, Ingrid. I think you're doing a great job. I'd love to hear from the girls too, so I don't want to take up too much time.
Okay, dokes. The differentiation and inclusion. This has been fascinating as part of our deepening of our understanding of what differentiation also means, and inclusion. Differentiation and inclusion, talking about student narratives, student histories, cultures, language, learning styles, even connectivity in a space. How are they able to connect to be able to take part in a classroom? And how all of that understanding brings, if we're able to bring the student voice into that, our relationship with each student, in understanding what that means for each of them so that we can bring them along with us. So again, no definitive answer, but the role of the student voice has become so much more important, especially sort of from grade 2 or 3 upwards right into high school, but how that impacts the role of differentiation or understanding and our efficacy in meeting the needs of the individual in that space. Then again, the false mindset, the courage it takes to walking the talk. What is it that, how, the things that we do, how does that land? Are the messages that we are intending, are they landing as growth oriented? Like the feedback, that fortnightly feedback form that landed with parents that were saying, you're judging my child, you're now keeping records? Or how is it that we have, or the courage that we need to be able to walk the talk and align what it is that we are saying and that we're teaching by and communicating with parents? When in this environment that is so tough for everybody, for us and for our parent body, it is so tough out there. How is it that when they are wanting something that's tangible, like marks and prizes and awards and things and rankings that they understand as a way that is tangible, how is it that we are walking with them and our report system, when they get a report from us, what is that report saying to them? Is that aligned with our growth-oriented intentions and our belief in how we learn? Or is that in fact mixing the messages that we're trying to get to? So just James wrote, I know, James, that this is one of your favorite quotes, and I recently wrote an article on this as well for our newsletter. Learning, it's by Anders Ericsson, who died very recently, sadly. having written his book, Peak, another one of his book, his latest one, Peak. But in that he says learning isn't a way of reaching one's potential, but rather a way of developing it, and we can create our own potential. We have so many conversations at school about, and with parents too, about them saying, you know, this child is not fulfilling her potential. And if we think about what that actually means, that who has decided what that child's potential is? And right now, this child is presenting in this particular way right now. We don't know. And in fact, who is it for us to say or even imagine what that child's potential is, and how it is the child's or even our own choice in where it is that we want to take that and create our own potential. So just a really, it changes the language that we use to communicate with our parent body.
Yeah. Ingrid, that quote is so powerful, just in terms of recognizing that every one of us, not just our students, but every one of us is currently working to the maximum of our current potential. We can't do better than we can right now unless we change and become the person who can do better. And that idea that we're building ourselves, creating ourselves, improving ourselves, not trying to tap into things that it may or may not be there, but in charge of creating our own potential, is enormously powerful. And I think it's also, just to sort of connect a few of the dots we've talked about today, it can be very, very humbling. I often talk about the fixed mindset as being the fear mindset, because you fear revealing your limits, you fear people judging you, finding out who you are. But I talk about the growth mindset as being the courage mindset, because when you realize that life isn't about comparing yourself to other people, working out if you're better than them, or it makes you very, very humble, and be able to say to people, say, this is me today. If a challenge comes along that I want to overcome, I'll change myself into the person I can, the person I can become. And it means you stop competing with other people. And I think one of the great examples of this is Roger Federer. Roger Federer, not in his early days, but recently, when he loses a game of tennis, he's very quick to congratulate the other person, but also to thank them. And the reason he thanks them is because he can beat a lot of players. But that player that just beat them was one of the few people in the world that could show him how to improve. Roger Federer isn't interested in being the best tennis player in the world. He's interested in being the best tennis player he can be. And so the competition allows him to grow. And that sense of, it's not about being better than somebody else, it's about being better than the person you were yesterday, gives you a very humble and very gracious outlook on life that I think is one of the reasons we do this work.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, James. I'm going to move on to our student drive team. The group is called NEST. They are, as far as we know, the only student drive team in a primary school in South Africa. We would love to reach out to other schools so that our girls can connect with another school and have chats. These are students who before the lockdown would meet every week with their teacher, Mrs. McLaren, and talk about cognitive education, how it is that they can reach other children to inspire them. They've been involved in new parent orientation, new children orientation, teaching them thinking tools, and speaking to parents. They were going to present at ICOT, the International Conference of Thinking, that TSSA was involved with. So we've got a number of groups of girls who've been involved, and we've got 5 of them here today who have looked at the growth mindset continuum. This we have found as a school to be, for everyone out there, if you want a tool that really helps you to grapple with what becoming more growth oriented we have found to be an incredibly useful tool. We use this in our tutor groups, and what we look at is, this is a tool that is not a judgment. This is just an indication of where you're at now in various ways, and looking at where you might choose to want to go towards a more growth-oriented way of taking yourself forward. So each of these students has looked at an aspect of the growth mind continuum, and they're going to speak to that and what it means to them personally. And also they're going to mention the habit of mind that they have been developing strategies for that actually helps them to become more growth oriented. So it's very easy to say, I want to shift, but how? What actions are you going to be able to take? And they're going to share a little bit of the things that they have done from a habits of mind point of view. Just touch on that for you to gain an understanding of what that means. What has been quite interesting in the past is where I've done this with students and they have circled where they're at for something on the continuum, how when they've gone back to it a couple of weeks later, they go, oh my word, actually I'm more fixed oriented than I thought I was, because what this tool does is it actually gets you thinking about the depth of what it is that you're doing. And it's not a judgment, it's just a statement of where you're at, and a fantastic tool for us as individuals, as adults to look at too. So I'm going to hand over to, let me just stop sharing, to our first person, Amy Falcon, who is ready for us. We are all social distanced here. Amy, you can take your mask off, Angel.
And Ingrid, just while you get that ready, there is of course a copy of the Mindset Continuum in the chat box to download if you haven't already done that. So down the bottom there's a chat box that'll open up and you can download a copy of the Continuum from there.
Great. Is she there? Yes. Is it? Oh, great. Oh, good, Amy. You can start.
Thank you. Today I'll be talking about how I've used the mind continuum with effort along social distance learning. And in the beginning, I had quite a rather fixed mindset where effort is necessary, because not having the interaction with teachers made it rather hard and giving effort not as enjoyable, because you just feel like you're plodding along and submitting into a computer and maybe getting a comment or two out, but you don't get the same interaction as when you're actually online, being able to ask questions. Because it's one thing to ask questions just in a chat, but it's a lot harder when you don't see where it's going, but just get a response. And now I've definitely improved my mindset as we've been able to communicate across Zoom, because it's giving you more to interact with, and it gives you something to strive to and be better and to keep going. And I think that definitely helped change my mindset in a lot of ways.
What habit of mind has helped you along with that you've developed?
So I've been using the habit of mind persisting, and in that way I was having fun with the work I was doing and did my best to do it in fun ways that made sure that I could keep persisting. I asked for help in areas that I wasn't quite sure of and took baby steps, getting there slowly, trying to do more each day.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It was just really wonderful to hear how well you could articulate where you are on that growth mindset continuum. And I really just want to acknowledge you for that. I found it incredibly inspiring. Thank you for having the courage and being in that courage mindset to do that today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
Ingrid, have we got another student there? Are you setting up somewhere?
Unmute. Okay, turn your sound up. Is your sound up? Okay,
It's always the joys of technology, isn't it?
sound down and then choose my sound.
So at first, with challenges, I was at a fixed mindset because I was afraid of failing and I wouldn't put enough effort into taking challenges and I would just take the easy ones. But with the habit of mind taking responsible risks, I definitely changed to a more growth mindset, getting out of my comfort zone because I really wanted to do better. So I went onto a growth mindset, trying new challenges which were out of my comfort zone.
Okay, thank you so much, Karabo. I'm going to hand you over to Rachel Firefield.
Okay, so today I will be talking about the mindset continuum on a worldview perspective, and I will be talking about starting team sports for me. So a few years ago, when I first started at Kingsmead, I never wanted to do sport because I was afraid that people would judge me by it and I'd make a mistake and I would feel ashamed if I had made a mistake and I would be embarrassed about it. And so I never did sport until it became compulsory to do. And I did tennis at home, so I did that quite a lot, and the tennis challenges came up. And my parents said, you have to try out for the team. And I did not want to. I was not having it. And I was freaking out because I was so scared of these team sports. And then that night I went to bed and I thought to myself, when I started ballet a few years ago, I was going to do an exam and it was optional. And I didn't want to do it for the same reason because what if I made a mistake and I would embarrass myself in front of the examiner and the pianist and everyone there. And my mom eventually convinced me to do the ballet exam. And afterwards, I felt like, wow, that was amazing. I didn't feel nervous at all. And I was actually having a lot of fun with that. So I made up my mind that I was going to do the tennis challenges because I thought, I'm only a kid once, and what do I have to lose? And so I did the tennis challenges and I had so much fun. And then my mindset expanded and I thought, wow, how much have I been missing out on all these years when I haven't been trying out team sports? And right then I was starting to use the habit of mind, remaining open to continuous learning. And then I started trying more sports and I had more fun. And and I'm still doing sports today.
Okay, thank you. We're going to hand over to Vivi Patibakir.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be talking about the success of others by sharing a little bit about my tennis journey. In the first stages, I was definitely very fixed and didn't want to challenge myself or play tennis at all. I gave up because my sisters got the hang of tennis much faster than me. I was still struggling. The things that came very easily to them didn't come as fast to me. So I gave up and I thought, well, they were born with the talent and I wasn't. And I didn't want to play any more tennis. Regardless of the tips my coach gave me, I only practiced the tips once I believed I could do better. What encouraged me to change was that my sisters forced me to play with them, even if I didn't want to. Even if I didn't want to try, because in my head it was, I was already so bad, so if I don't try, it's okay because I'm just going to fail anyway. Because I won't get any better. They were always giving me constructive criticism, but I took it and I started applying it, and I was just fed up with myself for not trying. So I gave it a try one day and it came out for the best. The strategies I use, where am I now, is that I think I'm growth or high growth, because I've learned that not only that you have to challenge others, but also yourself to always be improving. I'm now ready to take on challenges as they come, no matter how long they take. The strategies I use to get to where I am now is that I've learned that everything takes time and everyone learns things at different speeds and picks up things at different rates. And that certain things come faster to different people, and that's okay. Also to be patient and not get fed up with myself, and that I mustn't just give up when something doesn't happen as fast as somebody else, and that good things take time. No matter how long it took, I got to a point where I felt that I could take on anything and I didn't feel like a failure. The habits of mind that I practiced was working interdependently and metacognition, because I had to work with my sisters and my coach, and it took hours to get to a place where I felt like I was trying and I was doing good enough. And metacognition, because I was thinking about myself and my attitude towards the whole thing on playing tennis and how I was very negative about it. Thank you.
I am going to be bringing Zia Dazu into the room now. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Zia and I'll be speaking about feedback and my learning adventure in terms of feedback. And I wanted to start by speaking about where I was in the first stages or in the initial stages. And I think I was on a fixed or low growth mindset level. And this is because I always felt embarrassed to hear about my areas of improvements, and I looked at them more as failures rather than room for improvement and areas to learn more. And what made me change was the encouragement from those around me, like my parents and my teachers and my friends, that told me that getting feedback will actually help you in the process of learning, and that you should look at what you call a failure as more of an area for growth. And I feel like that really motivated me to where I am now, which is, I would say, on a high growth mindset. And some strategies I used is to get to the level where I am now is embracing my mistakes and seeing them more as room for improvement and as a flag to remind me where I should be or where I should strive to stay at and be. And I've taken time to understand how I can improve by thoroughly listening to the feedback and taking into consideration what my teachers or my parents might say, and allowing them to give me the constructive criticism, knowing that it will only benefit me. And an example that Mrs. B actually reminded me of is in the beginning of this year, we had geography, and in two of my assessments, my marks weren't where I hoped they would be. And so I thought that I should ask Mrs. B what I'm doing wrong or where I can improve. And she said that I should maybe try moving and not being so distracted by those around me. And that was her feedback. And the reason I use this as an example is because that was the feedback, and I thoroughly listened to it. And then once I did what she said, I immediately improved. And throughout my learning adventure, the habit of mind that has really helped me is listening with understanding and empathy, because receiving feedback and constructive criticism is really important, but actually taking the time to understand what your teachers or your parents might be saying is what helps you to improve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, James. So these conversations would continue when we have our student-led conferences. Each student looks at the mindset continuum and takes it into each subject and has a look at examples of where they have shifted and what has shifted them particularly. And then they choose a couple of those examples to share with parents when we have a conference with the student-led, with the parents, the student, and the teacher. And the parents are absolutely blown away by the insight and the depth at which the students can reflect on their own learning. And this process is incredibly empowering for our students, motivating for them, because they realize that the powers within themselves to, if they act on things, that it actually makes a difference. They also can choose to not act on something for whatever that reason is. We don't have to be growth oriented about everything. We don't have the capacity to grow all the time in every aspect, but it's the awareness of where it is that we're wanting to grow and how it is that we can do that. Yeah. Some
Ingrid, that
insights
was
from us. Thank you.
Spectacular. And I know I was watching the screen here, watching people applaud and so forth. And you may not have seen yet, but there's comments coming through about the girls as well. Did a fantastic job there. Well done. Can I add just one little part to that? Because one thing that came through for me as I was listening, and some of the people in the audience may not be fully aware about your work with Habits of Mind. And it echoes back to what we said earlier on, that a growth mindset is just the understanding that growth is possible. Like Carol Dweck says, it gives you the path into the future. But probably the biggest misunderstanding I come across with growth mindsets is that a growth mindset isn't growth. Right? There are plenty of people in the world with a growth mindset that fail to achieve the growth. And there are some people in the world with a fixed mindset that have achieved enormous growth. But the important part that you've added to this work is to help the girls understand they're capable of the growth, but then equip them with the behaviours that allow them to achieve the growth. And by developing those habits of mind that the girls so clearly articulated, it was beautiful to listen to. They said, I can change. And these are the behaviours I need to engage in order to achieve that change. To be able to put those two parts together with the idea of practice is so important, because at the end of the day, what we really want is the growth. If we empowered it, well, we wouldn't empower. If all we did with our students was to help them understand that growth is possible, but didn't teach them how to achieve the growth, we'd be failing them terribly. And I think you've done an extraordinary job. And I know I speak for everyone on the call today. The girls did a beautiful job. So congratulations.
Well done, girls.
Yeah, I'm seeing thumbs up. I'm not sure, Jane, how are we going for time and what's the next part of the agenda? Do you want to, I'm just confused about
also
timing.
Just salute the girls. I mean, each one of you, I felt when you made yourself vulnerable, you really connected with all of us, because we had those kinds of struggles. And to purposefully go out and look at what you need to do and the kinds of habits of mind you need to deepen and strategies to do that is, it shows the way for others. And I think it's just a beautiful thing that they've done this afternoon. And I also want to acknowledge Kingsmead and Ingrid for the way you articulated, this is not only for the brain, this is for the human being that we deal with. And that kind of social and emotional safety is so critical for our being able to function as human beings. And the schooling process can be quite scary, and it is an environment which can tend to be judgmental. And so it takes a very conscious effort. And also for us to know what we've embedded in ourselves over all these years, things we're not conscious of yet. So it's really been wonderful. You opened some doors for our thinking and for our actions. So thank you. And I think really what we'd like to do over the next 10 minutes or so is perhaps field a few questions from anybody else here about, so what did that trigger for you? What would you like to ask that? And we could then perhaps ask James and Ingrid and Taryn and some of the girls if they would like to comment on that. So if we could collect a couple of questions, that would be very helpful. James, there were a couple of questions I sent on to you earlier that came from the audience. I don't know if you saw them. I sent them on your private little message box.
Oh, no, I'm sort of the messages are at a distance from me. If you want to read them out to me again, I'm happy to do it. So I did miss them.
Okay, so there was just looking at, preschoolers and growth mindset. Was, any kind of comments about that? And obviously relates to also our parenting. And there was also thought about the word growth and the word set. How do those two, isn't that a kind of oxymoron?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
you're right. There
comments I remember. I haven't
there.
used the right words, but I paraphrased them. I hope whoever asked them, if I didn't do you justice, please say so.
Look, in terms of the early learning settings, early primary school and so forth, the strategies are broadly the same. So sometimes I get asked questions about, young kids are so growth orientated and we take it away, and other times people say exactly the opposite, that they're so fixed and we've got to develop them. Where you find yourself on that continuum, whether it's towards the fixed end or towards the high growth end, is a sum total of all the mindset movers you've experienced in your life up until that point. Now, young students I find can sort of flip around a bit more quickly because the weight of their experiences hasn't sort of pushed them to one end or the other. I find that some of the hardest people to shift are adults that are well towards the low growth end, that have been living in this little protective bubble their whole life that says this is all I am, and use that as an excuse for not doing something else. I'm only this good, so you can't expect me to do that. I'm not that sort of person, so I can't be expected to do that. And they live in this bubble and says they use that as their excuse. When you're trying to work with those people, coming along and saying, you've got no boundaries. You're very capable of growing and changing and becoming the sort of person who can do those things you've avoided all your life. Their first reaction is very emotional. It's very guttural, and they push back and they say, no, that's not true. You're not right. That's not the way the world works. After a bit of time, they open up quite a lot because it becomes quite freeing as they realize that those things they've tried to protect themselves all their life from, they're actually capable of achieving. So I'm not sure that's where the question was aimed at, but that's sort of the answer I gave. And the other question, Jane, you asked was about, what was the second one? Sorry.
It was also just about the term of the growth mindset. There's someone who felt that
mindsets. Yeah.
And I also love the way.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And what else can you call it? And the way I'm sensing you're going is that, first of all, courage mindset sounds also something that is a lovely way of describing. It's also more about what you do. You don't have to teach it. I don't know. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, look, what can you say? The English language is not a very useful thing sometimes. The word set, as it applies to the term mindset, is just a set of ideas. Right? When you hold a set of ideas in your head that says, I was born like this and I'm always going to be like this, there are some things I can't do, and Ingrid is so lucky because she's just born with this amazing ability to communicate with people, and I've just never been able to do that. When you hold that set of ideas, you behave in a particular way. But that set doesn't have to be set in stone. It's just a grouping of ideas. And so I can change my mindset, I can change the ideas that are in my head to become more growth orientated. And you do that through lived experience, but that's a much longer story. I can see over here now there's some questions coming up. Someone's asked for the continuum, that's up above if you scroll further up.
Yep. Also about feedback, and I'm very interested to get both of your responses, James and Ingrid, because I know, Ingrid, you've been through this journey of changing the way you give feedback and assessment, and that it's necessarily an easy journey. So there's somebody who said that they have tried to give feedback in a way that doesn't focus on marks, or maybe doesn't even give marks, and had quite a negative feedback from students and parents. So your comments.
I think one of the very interesting aspects of this work is working with parents. So it's if we're talking about developing or nurturing a growth-oriented culture, that culture has to include your parents. It requires, we refer it to the drip method. So not drip torture, although sometimes it feels to some like torture, but it's literally, it's something that's not something that you talk about once and that everyone gets it. It is something that one builds. The complexities are to such an extent that one has to keep coming back. It's an ongoing conversation. As far as working with the children, it's about letting them know and the parents know what the learning intentions are. What are you trying to achieve? Those opportunities for practice. And then when you give the final assessments, it's not as if marks are bad, but marks indicate where you're at right now. And if with taking all the critique and the feedback that you have, if you act on that and you've had opportunities to redo and improve, how that impacts the improvement that you're able to achieve. So it's based on how it is that we can improve. Marks only indicate, and James, you sometimes refer to a scale, your weight on a scale. That just indicates what your weight is today. It doesn't predict your weight going forward or where you were when you were 5. Marks are an indication of where you're at right now. And for parents to understand that is very tricky and requires work for some, really hard for some people.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points to make there. One about assessment, and you've hit the nail on the head, that grades and awards themselves don't have to send fixed messages. As long as the message we communicate with them is that I'm not judging you, I'm just judging where you're up to. When I assess you, it's about where you are, not who you are. And if that's the message that we can perpetuate, it's going to send much more growth-orientated messages to students. One of the ways I try to do that when I work with teachers is to say that when you're assessing, either assess against only one person, so the student themselves, and talk about how far they've changed, what they've grown, or assess against everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone, not just everyone in the classroom, everyone. Because what we tend to do is we measure in a very, very narrow band, and we say, you're here or here or here or here, as if there's some critical distinction between that. When in reality, what we're measuring is this huge scale from being a 1-year-old through to being a mature adult. And these students are just slightly different places on that scale. So recognizing that growth and that change is important. And I think the other point that came up there too was the one about parents. Often in my workshops, people talk about, this would be easy if it wasn't for those bloody parents. And then I point out that most of them are parents as well, and they're sending these same messages. The point we need to realize is that our parents are doing what they're doing out of love. We were brought up, many of us, in the self-esteem movement by our parents. And when we came home and said, Mum, Dad, I find maths really hard, Mum and Dad went, oh no, their self-esteem's going down. What do we do about this? And they said, don't worry, sweetheart, not everyone's good at maths. Put that down, don't struggle, don't feel bad. Maybe you're good at something else. And they did that out of love, thinking that what they were doing was protecting their child from struggle and from failure. When in actual fact, what they were doing was building a boundary around them, saying, you're not a mathematical person, your time and effort and struggle in that area is going to be wasted. When we talk about these ideas with parents and explain exactly what Ingrid's been talking about, connecting to the parent community, talk about this idea of developing and where you're up to and so forth, parents are overwhelmed with the freedom it gives them to stop judging their child, because they did it from a 6-month-old. How many of us as parents, when we saw our own children, when they were less than 1, were saying, oh, this one's the smart one, this one's the artistic one, this one's the musical one, and we're not sure about the other one. Right from the very early age, we try to judge and compartmentalize a lot of these children. And we do it out of love, trying to say this is, who you are, rather than releasing those boundaries and saying you can become whoever you want to be. So parents have an important role to play. They're doing their role at the moment out of love. They'll continue to do it out of love. When they're informed the right way, it'll give them the right messages. I'm not sure I did that clearly. How did that sound, Ingrid? That makes sense? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
What's the most common word you've heard since the start of COVID-19? It's been pivot, it's been unprecedented, and it's been you're on mute. Words we hear, aren't they?
I think we're going to wrap.
I know we're getting close to time, so Jane, if I can share one more thing.
Lovely.
I know people, what are the strategies? What are the strategies? What are the strategies? I just want to give people, before we go, the growth mindset strategy. All right, if you can just take this one idea and apply it to assessment, apply it to growth, apply it to all areas, you will deliver a whole lot more growth-orientated messages in your classroom. And the one idea you need to carry with you, well, first off, great book, a lot of it's in there. But more to the point, the one strategy you need to think about is the word backstory. If you can just look at where that child is and say, what's the backstory that brought them there? What's the backstory that's going to send them there in the future? If you look at that, I'll tell you a quick story. Have I got time to tell a quick story, Jane?
Definitely.
Definitely. Look, I think this sums up what this is all about. And the story is about Picasso. And Picasso, the story goes, was sitting in Central Park in New York. And he was sitting on a park bench on his own sketching. And a lady recognised him from across the way and came up and approached him and said, "Oh, Picasso, Picasso, I love your work and I saw you sitting there and I couldn't resist. Have you got a few moments? Would you mind, please, doing a sketch for me?" A little bit bold, really, isn't it? But that's what she did. Was you asking Picasso to do a sketch? Anyway, Picasso's flipped over his fresh page and taken a couple of moments to do a sketch for this lady. And 2 minutes later, has torn out the page and given it to her. You can imagine her response. This lady just, "Oh, thank you so much, Picasso. I'll treasure this forever. That's amazing. Thank you so much." And Picasso's turned around and said, "That'll be $50,000. Thanks very much." Now, the lady's a bit taken back. $50,000. How can you possibly charge $50,000 for 2 minutes work? That's outrageous. And Picasso's calmly turned around and said, "I'm sorry, miss. I think you've misunderstood me. You see, that sketch didn't take me 2 minutes. That sketch took me a lifetime." And see, what Picasso understood was that the value wasn't in the 2 minutes spent sketching. The value is in the lifetime becoming the person who could do the sketch in 2 minutes. He recognized that being able to do that wasn't a part of who he was in any permanent sense. It was part of who he was today because of what he'd done in the past. And when you deeply understand that, you get growth mindsets. When you deeply get them, when you look at someone today, the first time you see them and you go, "Oh, they're so amazing." And you look at them and go, "But they used to be 1 year old and useless. They couldn't do anything when they were 1 year old. Think of what they've done between now and then to become that person." And Ingrid, one of your students, was talking about how she has the idea still that some students just pick up things faster than other students. The truth is they don't. I know it appears like they do. But when you come into a classroom, when you come onto a tennis court, when you come onto whatever it might be, and some students seem to pick it up more quickly than others, more likely than not, they're actually a little bit further along the journey. You didn't actually start at the same place. You were starting at different places, but it seems like someone gets a head start. They didn't really. We could have a longer story about that. Anyway, Jane, I'm sure you want to wrap things up because these people have loved ones and families and better places to be. And it is coming on to 1:45 in the morning here for me. So.
Well, we really have to thank you for staying up so late just to be with us. And thank you.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure.
For everybody, this is certainly not the last that we hope to be seeing James and Ingrid and the lovely team and Taryn and all of you. This is an ongoing journey. This is something that we're here for the long term, and it's what's beautiful is developing a community practice that we are in it together. And so please draw on that support. And thanks to Dan for setting up the TSSA Thinking Zone. Please on it because there's stuff going on there, and how we can continue this conversation and these activities going forward. So we will be in touch. And thank you so much, everyone, for taking your time to invest in your growth, because that's what it is. It's not easy right now to find that time. I know you're exhausted. And you too, James. It's really late. You better go to bed. Thank you so much.
Right, Jane, thank you.
And your gorgeous team of
girls.
I mean, wow. And Taryn, lovely to see you. I'm sorry you didn't talk this time, but awesome. And looking
I wasn't sorry because my anxiety levels weren't as high as the others in the room. So thank you.
Oh, lovely. Thanks very much. Really, it's just been wonderful. So powerful.
Thanks, Jane. You've done a wonderful job putting it all together.
Thanks, everybody. Lovely to see you.
Yay. Bye.
Well, pages and pages of people. How'd your streaming go, Dan?
It went well. Didn't have any issues. I see Jane is trying to call me on that side. I see she left quickly.
Jane, it's like Ingrid's on as well.
With I'm saying it's still on with James. Do you want to come back? Okay, right. James, she's coming back on for a few minutes.
Cool.